So this is our first presentation for 2019. And in February, I guess I'll just hit some highlights and then introduce Kirsten. Our highlights are that on February 7th, we will begin a support group. And it will be held here at the church from 6:30 to 7:30 in the evening. And it's called Safe Landings. And so it's not at all, there are no prerequisites. You don't need a certain diagnosis, you don't need any particular issues. In our world today, what we wanted to start with was a support group where we remind each other that we're all doing the best we can and that we're worthwhile people, and we go out and hopefully not feel kind of beat up by the world. So that'll begin on February 7th from 6:30 to 7:30 in the evening.
What day of the week is that?
A Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah. And then on Sunday, February 24th, our speaker will be Stephen Kavalovich. I think that's right, not sure. But he's coming from New Jersey. He's a national speaker on recovery, opioid addiction and recovery. He was a paramedic. He worked on 9/11, at the site from 9/11, and ended up with his own addiction issues and lost pretty much everything by the time he hit bottom. And so this is the story now of how he's piece by piece kind of putting his life back together. I've heard him speak and I was pretty impressed. Then in March we will have a panel, a psychiatrist that uses medication-assisted treatment, a person in recovery, and a counselor. Part of it, they will do a brief presentation, but that's so people have an opportunity to ask questions and get good information. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do through our ministry here. And then in April, we expect to have another panel organized, and then we'll see where we go from here. If you have questions, you can always call the church office. You can ask them to get a hold of me. I will get back to you. If any of you are in a situation where you have a situation with a family member or something, or yourself, and you would like some support, by all means let me know, and I'd be more than happy to sit down with you. So that's kind of what we're doing this year, and we're pretty excited about it. And this is our kickoff session. So it's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Kirsten Peachey. Kirsten is a chaplain. She's an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. She holds a Master of Social Work from the University of Chicago and a Doctor of Ministry degree in Faith and Health from the Chicago Theological Seminary. She's Director of Faith and Health Partnerships for Advocate Aurora Health. And she works with faith communities to support their role as promoters of health and healing through training and partnerships. It's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Kirsten Peachey.
Thank you. So maybe before we start, we could start with prayer. And I'll say more about that later, but I think especially maybe a prayer of gratitude for you all coming out tonight in this bitter cold, and isn't it like a howling red wolf moon or something? What is it called? Blood moon or something? So even more, you know. All right, let's pray. God, may you fill us with your Spirit. May your Spirit flow through us as we gather together to share our wisdom, to deepen our knowledge, to open our hearts, to be a place that houses your love, that is a place through which your love, your care, and your justice flows. May we come together as community tonight and be connected with each other. And in doing so, may we be your instruments of healing for your community and for your world. In your holy name we pray. Amen. So I'm going to talk tonight about what it means to be what I call a helpful congregation. Healing, engaged, loving people. And I think probably what I'm going to tell you is not actually going to be anything that you don't know already. And so I invite you, as we have our conversation tonight, and I hope it is a conversation, feel free to jump in if you have a thought or something you want to share, excuse me, we all know something about love. We all know something about healing. We all know something about how to engage those things. And so I invite you, as we have this conversation, to think about, like, when you hear something, oh yes, I know about that. To like take note of that and to like make sure to connect with your own wisdom about this, because this whole series is about the opioid crisis, about addiction, about mental health. And I'm really glad to do this one first, because for me, love and care and connection is the foundation for any kind of anything that's going to help with that. It's our capacity to be agents of love in the world that's going to make a difference. Yes, we need medications. Yes, we need treatment. Yes, we need trained clinical people. But really, the love and care that we show for each other is really foundational to any kind of healing. And my guess is you already know something about that as members of congregations and members of community. So I want to start off with this poster. It's an old poster that was produced by the United Church of Christ years ago. This little story. Why do I love the church? Why do I love church? Just last Sunday, a little girl, maybe 4 years old, walked by herself across the aisle, left her parents, and climbed into the lap of a woman who is 83 years old and who lives alone. Can you picture that in your mind from your own experience in your congregations? And to me, this story encapsulates what it is that we're talking about when we talk about helpful congregations, healing, engaged, loving people. There's something that happened in the history of these relationships that allowed this little girl to feel free to leave the safety of her family and actually move through space and be close to someone else. And that for that 83-year-old woman who lives alone, the profound healing experience of having a little child come and crawl up into your lap, I mean, how wonderful is that to experience? So keep this picture in your mind, because what I'm going to try to do through this whole conversation that we have tonight is to help you notice, how do we already do this in our congregation? How are these little stories already a part of our life in our faith communities? How are these little stories already living in us, in our wider community? So I'm going to talk just very briefly about trauma, in particular what we call adverse childhood experiences, and then move into and some of the effects that has on our bodies and some of the implications that has for mental health and for addictions in particular. But the most of the time I'm going to spend, again, talking about the helpful part, okay? But I want to just give some context. When I say the words trauma and adverse childhood experiences, is this pretty common to people? Are people pretty familiar with this language? It's being used a lot now, a lot of talk about trauma. But what I want to talk about is trauma and the impact that it has on our brains and our bodies as a natural response to the world that we live in. So our bodies adapt to the kinds of experiences that we have. So if you live in a world that's dangerous, your brain learns to prepare for danger. And so some of the things that happen in your brain is, you've heard about the fight, flight, or freeze mode. The brain's overbond, what do they call it, the reptilian brain, respond immediately. You sort of are hyper aware, alert all the time. If you're experiencing danger, that's actually an adaptive thing to be able to do. If there's danger around you, you want to be able to respond. You want to be able to be sort of quick all the time. That's what's going to help you to survive. If you're in a safe kind of environment where you don't feel threatened, you're going to be more kind of slow. You're going to kind of do more processing of things before you respond. You may be more relational and be more kind of like taking in other people and relating to other people before you respond. And that's adaptive for a safe kind of environment. And the issue arises when what you've been prepared for in your adaptation doesn't match the reality of the world. So in your family, it could be that there's a lot of danger, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of things that you have to respond to and protect yourself from. And so you develop these kind of adaptive behaviors for that may not work that well when you're in school, for example, where hopefully it's a more safe environment, or in Sunday school, or out in the community. Just as if you're used to everything being safe and being relational, and then you get into a really high stress environment, you may not be very well suited for it. So we try to think of trauma and the kind of responses that people have to that, not as pathological, but as adaptive. People are responding out of the way in which they've had to adapt to be able to deal with their environment. So hyper arousal can look like misbehavior or defiance, but it may in fact just be someone using the adaptations that they've had to have for their environment. So trauma, what is it? Any experience that overwhelms a person's ability to integrate their emotional experience. And I added community in there too, because everything we're talking about is true at the individual level, but also at the community level. So if you think of Elgin as a person, right, as an individual, everything that we say could also apply to Elgin or Chicago or any kind of community, a neighborhood, even a block. So you can think about it at the individual level, but also at the community level. Any experience that overwhelms a person or community's ability to integrate their emotional experience. So their ability to stay present, their ability to understand what's happening and make sense out of it, to be able to integrate the feelings that are coming to them, and to make sense of that experience. And trauma is also subjective, so something that may be traumatic for me may not be traumatic for someone else. It has to do with how do I interpret that experience. Comments, questions? Yes?
Can we have a copy of this?
Yes, I will get them to Pat, and you have a website I think
Yes,
you're going to post
put it
things
on our
on,
website.
or if you signed up your name on the list, probably they can email it out. So are people familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experiences study? People know about that? Okay, so some do. This was a study that was done back in 1997, so it's actually getting old now, but it's been redone many, many times, and continues to show the same results. It was done with about 17,000 people that were under the Kaiser Permanente insurance plan, and two physicians did a study where they correlated people's responses to 10 questions about experiences that they had when they were children with people's health outcomes when they were adults. So the experiences that they had as children connected them with their health outcomes as adults. And these were mostly middle class, mostly white, insured people. And what they found was that and these are the kinds of things that they asked. Those 10 questions had to do with people's experiences of a neglect, abuse, physical, sexual abuse, and other kinds of sort of family dysfunction. A parent with a mental illness, an incarcerated parent, a divorce, other kinds of things like this in the family. And so what they found was that these experiences are actually very common, that at least 2/3 of the population have at least one of these experiences at some point during their childhood. It's something that we can say, not those people that have trauma, but we who have trauma, because this is something that is really something that everyone experiences. And they also found that they're interrelated. So if you have one experiences of trauma, almost everyone who has at least one experience also has more than one, also has additional ones. So they are cumulative. Also, the more that you have, it's almost like a stair step. The more of these experiences that you have, the more health problems you have later on in life. And it's not, let me just say, it's not like if I have 4 of those experiences that are up there, for sure I'm going to have bad health outcomes down the road. This is like looking across whole population. So if you have 500 people, there's a very strong likelihood that people that have 4 of those experiences are going to have more poor health outcomes down the road. But it's not an individual kind of thing. So the other thing is that as a person from the healthcare world, we also know that these experiences are some of the most profound indicators of health outcomes later on. And we call them the social determinants of health, the social kinds of things that impact our health long term. So again, not that every single person who has one of these experiences is going to have an impact, but let's say out of 100 people, people who have zero ACEs or adverse childhood experiences, about 1 in 16 will be a smoker. 1 in 69 have substance use disorder around alcohol use. 1 in 480 may use IV drugs. 1 in 14 has heart disease, and 1 in 96 may attempt suicide. And then you can see as you go and increase the number of these experiences that people have, how those numbers shift. And so if you have 3, you're much more likely to be a smoker. You're much more likely to have a substance use disorder related to alcohol, much more likely to use IV drugs, have heart disease, or attempt suicide. And you can see as you move up how much more that increases. So the link between these experiences, especially if you have a lot of experiences in health outcomes, is really something that we need to pay attention to. And in healthcare, we're really trying to take this seriously, not just understanding how it affects children, but actually how it affects all of us in our health long term. And so you may find, as this starts to catch on more within the medical community, that when you go into the doctor, you may find that these questions begin to be asked of us even as adults. What kinds of things have we experienced as children? One doctor I know doesn't go through the whole routine, but basically she'll say, "How was your childhood? Pretty good or kind of hard?" And people will say a little bit about their experience, and then she'll say, "And what helped you get through that?" And that's the way that she works at this with patients. And you can imagine the kinds of things that come up and the impact that has on people to have that opportunity to tell their story. One of the studies done by these same physicians showed that when doctors in a doctor's office just ask the question like that, how was your childhood? Pretty good or kind of hard? And how did you get through that? That when they just asked the question, and they didn't do any kind of big intervention, it was really just asking the question, they found that people over the next year were much, much less likely to come back in again for another doctor's appointment. Whereas for those that were not asked the question, they were much more likely to come again and again and again to the doctor's office. There's something about just asking and being present with people that can be healing. And so think about, in our own faith communities, in our own context, how do we invite people to tell their stories? How do we kind of open up the possibility for people to be heard and for people to be listened to and known? Comments, questions about this?
I have a question. Looking at your data at the top, it says 1 to 3. Does that suggest that's normal? 51% of the population, is that what it says?
Yeah, 51% of the population report 1 to 3.
So I was thinking,
One to three.
this survey described a real-time life and so and so. People who don't have some of those bells and whistles on transient by, it's got to be much worse.
Yes, I'll say a little bit more about that because this is very limited. Those experiences, those 10 experiences is a very narrow field of what the kinds of things are that people can experience in life that could be considered trauma. So yes, your point is well taken, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a minute. Yeah, good catch. Anything else? Other questions, comments? Others that know something about the study that want to share anything? And this has been, like I said, this study has been repeated in various forms, various places, various contexts, and it's pretty much across the board the same. That at least 2/3 of us will have at least one of these experiences. Okay. So again, I mean, this is just reinforcing if you the ACE score of 6 or more may result in a 20-year difference in life expectancy. So again, it's just something to pay attention to, that these experiences that we have of struggle, of adversity, and challenge, at any point in our life, actually affects our bodies in pretty profound ways. So this gets to your point.
Okay.
So the top ones there around, are sort of the ones that we often think of as sort of the traumatic experiences, violence in the home or divorce or mental illness, neglect, that kind of thing. And you could probably think of, other kinds of things. Think about, there's medical trauma, things that, like what could that include? Like if you think of a broad category of things that could happen medically that could be traumatic, what could that be?
Cancer.
Cancer diagnosis. What else?
I don't see up there like early losses. I mean, I've read a lot about people that experience, loss of a parent or somebody significant to them at an early age, and that kind of thing can, cause a family to have more financial problems. A mom by themselves raising a bunch of kids can't attend things and be there for things. So,
Yeah.
that's a traumatic experience too, and that's
Yes.
related to the medical kind of issue too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Other kinds of traumas that you can think of, medical, financial, or physical, emotional.
A really bad work injury, heart attacks.
Yep. Losing a job. Not being able to pay the rent. Financial hardship, not being able to, bankruptcy because of medical bills. I mean, all these things. If we started to really talk about all the ways in which we kind of experience trauma in our lives, we'd have quite a list. And none of us would be untouched by it. So there's kind of like interpersonal experiences of trauma, but then there's also other kinds of experiences too, such as poverty or experiences of discrimination and racism. Those kinds of like daily experiences of injury based on who you are. Refugees. You were talking about you have a family from Afghanistan that you've supported. I mean, what is their traumatic experience like? Not only in their own homeland, but then coming into this environment and having to live through a Chicago winter. That could be traumatic. So, and then, you know, there's also sort of these historical collective experiences of, like, for instance, the Holocaust or other kinds of, like, for Jewish people, these sort of, you know, generation after generation after generation of oppressive experience and exile and being disrupted, the experience of Palestinian people, other people who have experienced war, slavery, experiences of slavery. These sort of generational historical trauma experiences also sort of lay the groundwork for what people experience. So there's death of a parent. All right. So just a little bit about how trauma affects us, because there's definitely some pathways that impact us. So you can have childhood traumatic events, but I would argue not only childhood but also adult, because these things affect us when we are adults as well. But when you have traumatic events in childhood, that can create a disruption in your development. So for children, and really for all of us, when we have these experiences of adversity or challenge, it can actually change our brain pathways, the ways in which our brains function, and the genes, the way our genes are turned on or off, or the neuro pathways, they're called. It can also affect our endocrine system, so our hormones and things like that sort of regulate our organs can be disrupted. And our self-capacities, I'm going to say more about this in a little bit, but our self-capacities to manage our own feelings, to feel connected to other people, and to feel like you have relationships that can last and that can be meaningful. And then also feeling worthy of life, like you deserve love, you deserve to be alive, you deserve to be in the world. These are really important self-capacities that help to regulate the traumatic experience. But that gets disrupted when you have these kinds of experiences in childhood. And then when you have stress and you have these feelings that are coming because of stress, it can, people then act to relieve those feelings. So what can I do to get rid of these feelings? Maybe I'll drink. Maybe I'll take drugs. Maybe I'll be violent. Maybe I'll respond in a way that doesn't seem to make any sense. Maybe I'll strike out. I may pull back and retreat. I may try to hurt myself or hurt other people. So that's sort of the cycle. And what I want to talk about is this part, is this part around the disrupted development and the way in which being helpful, being healing, engaged, loving people, that's actually where we deal with that disruption. So Dr. Carl Bell is a psychiatrist who is local here in Chicago, but he's written many articles, done much research on community psychology. And I love this quote, and he says, "Risk factors are not predictive factors because of protective factors." So what he's saying here is that even though you have a risk factor, you've had some experience of adversity in your childhood, or you've had something that's happened that has sort of been overwhelming, that's been traumatic, that's not necessarily predictive of how you're going to be if you have protective factors that are at work in your life as well. And that's us. That's us in the faith community. That's us in community together. That's the love and care that we share for each other. So the Casey Family Foundation did this really interesting study and report on the way in which positive experiences regulate experiences of trauma. So they call it HOPE, Health Outcomes of Positive Experience. And so these different kinds of traumas that we have, adverse childhood experiences, post-traumatic stress disorder, moral injury, I don't know if you've heard that term, but it has to do, it's used a lot in veterans, with veterans. It's not the same as post-traumatic stress disorder. It's about, which is usually when something is done to you that sort of is overwhelming. It has to do with when you have had to do things that violate your own moral center. So you've had to, you've had to shoot at someone, or you've had to do something that is not what your moral center would normally say you should do. And they think that that's behind a lot of the suicide and a lot of the addiction within veterans. So moral injury and other traumas. And what they found is that healthy relationship is really the key for these positive experiences that balance experiences of trauma. So relationship shows up over and over and over in the literature, in the research, on what it is that helps when we have traumatic experiences. So for children, they say there are 4 kind of main ways in which these positive experiences happen. One is through nurturing and supportive relationships. So adult-child supportive and nurturing relationships. So think, how do we in our faith community create the opportunity for supportive and nurturing relationships between adults and children? Any examples?
Sunday school.
Sunday school. So there's an adult Sunday school teacher who's working with the kids and creating an environment, hopefully, that's nurturing and supportive. Formally or informally, it could be
Mission
both.
trips.
Mission trips, great, yeah. Lots of bonding that happens between adults and children.
Preschool
Programming.
programming.
Yep. Yeah. Anybody
There's a program
here?
called Kids Hope, which our congregation does, so it's one-on-one mentoring
Uh-huh.
for the child.
Yeah, mentoring is a great example. A lot of churches have some kind of mentoring program. And so I invite you, over the course of the next couple of weeks while you're in church, notice where do I see, it doesn't have to be a formal program, informally even, how are we doing this? Like, do I know the names of the kids in my church? Or is there a 4-year-old crossing the aisle to climb up into the lap of an 83-year-old woman who lives alone? How are we creating nurturing and supportive relationships? Stable, protective, and equitable environments in which to develop, play, and learn. So someone mentioned preschool programs. A lot of preschool programs that are based in churches really do have a sense of mission about either providing this kind of equitable, protective environment for kids who normally wouldn't get that because of various financial challenges or whatever. I know in Chicago, there are a lot of religious leaders who are doing a lot of advocacy around good quality education for all communities, people in all communities. Some churches starting their own schools to make sure that there are these kinds of environments. So think about how do we do that? What's our role as people of faith? Constructive social engagement and connectedness. That's the mission trips. That's the, kind of what is my purpose in the world to help serve and to be someone who can offer something to the world. So giving opportunities for kids to have a sense that I'm someone who can give something and share with others, really important. And then social and emotional competency. So just teaching kids basic skills on how to be a friend, how to be, how to share, how to talk to someone, how to reach out if someone seems to be hurting. And again, that's where Sunday school, Vacation Bible School, just, the kinds of things that we learn together in the faith community can be so important. Are you thinking of examples in your own churches? And then there are 3 parental kinds of positions that they also say are really important. One is meaningful conversations, but these are things that could happen in faith communities too. So really taking seriously what it is that kids have to say and what it is that they think, inviting their thoughts, inviting their ideas forward. Participating in their activities and knowing their friends is another thing that's really important for parents to do according to this study. And then parents managing their own stress is also something that's really critical. And again, so these are for parents, but absolutely for the Sunday school teacher or for, for my goddaughter, I was really impressed. I went to her field hockey game and her pastor was there. Her pastor came to watch her field hockey game. That's participating in activities and knowing friends. How do we do that in our faith community so that kids know that they're special? Kids know that an adult is taking an interest in them. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this this next part. It'll be in the slides, but this is the research behind what I was just talking about. So this shows for depression. On the left-hand side, these bars are the number of people who report having depression. So this is with 3 adverse childhood experiences or more. So people who've had 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, people who felt that their family stood by them, only 27% of them reported being symptoms of depression, whereas people who felt their family did not stand by them, 48% of people with 3 or more adverse childhood experiences reported feelings of depression. Same with feeling supported by friends, sense of belonging at high school, and enjoying community traditions. So what they're showing there is when you have these experiences of social support and social connection, it actually has an impact on the rates at which people report experiences of depression. And the same is true for obesity as well. And there's others too. So if you look up the Casey Foundation HOPE, Health Outcomes of Positive Experience, you can read the whole report. There's a lot of really interesting information. So what I want to talk about now for the rest of our time is this idea of a relational model for healing. And for me, this is all about Live Love, right? I was so excited to see the title of the series, which is Live Love. That's what we're talking about, both sort of in our interpersonal relationships, but also across the community. So these are some of the main components of this relational model for healing. And this is true, you can use this relational model for anything. So as you're talking over the next months about people with substance use disorders and opioid addictions, think about what's a relational model that we can use to be a supportive, caring community for people who struggle with these things and with their families. If there are other kinds of conflicts or other kinds of issues, think about how do we use this relational model to deal with this? Whether that has to do with something going on in the community around immigration or some kind of conflict going on within the congregation. So the first thing that we think about is that each person is really an expert on themselves. So if we kind of get away from the idea that those people need my help to make them better, and really understand each person is having what they need inside to be able to be well, and it's not our job to fix them, but it's our job to bring that out and to help them connect with what it is that they know for themselves about what they need. So it's really an important distinction, because a lot of times, even when we use the word serving other people, a lot of times what we're talking about is I am well and healthy and you are not, so I will serve you, one who needs my help. Or you are homeless, and so you need my help, and I'm going to come and I will help you, as opposed to really kind of being on a sense of mutuality, that this is a person who has something to offer as well. So very important shift that can sometimes be hard for us to make. And then again, going back to what I said before, that what you're seeing, behaviors, think of them as adaptations as opposed to symptoms of pathology. So when someone is acting out, quote unquote, to think of it not as a sign that they're of how injured they are, how wrong they are, but to actually understand it as something, a way in which they are adaptively trying to make sense out of what's going on. In the trauma-informed community, a lot of times this gets talked about as, rather than looking at someone and saying, what's wrong with you? Looking at someone and saying, what happened to you? What happened to you that would make you feel like this is the way to respond in this situation? And understand it as something that is there, that is happening, that they're doing because it has worked for them in the past to help them manage. So these self-capacities are really important. Feeling worthy of life, feeling like you deserve love. This is one of the most important things that we can do in ourselves and that we can nurture in children as a protective factor. Managing feelings, learning how to manage feelings, learning to feel feelings, and then to be able to manage them and to be able to integrate them into yourself. Really important. And then this idea of carrying a positive sense of connection with other people, even if they're not there. So, maybe you, when, if you have someone in college, a kid in college from that grew up in the church, maybe you send them a care package, or maybe there are other ways that you kind of help keep connected to them. Or is anybody here wearing jewelry that somebody gave them? Yeah. So anybody else? Yeah. A lot of us are probably. You got a wedding ring, yeah. But it could be earrings, or it could be a piece of clothing, or it could be some other kind of jewelry. That's like a concrete symbol or example of connection. That even when someone's not there, they're still here because I have them through this symbol. Or you might think about your home, or your office, or your faith community. All the symbols that we have that represent the connections that we have with other people that get carried in those symbols. So lots of ways that we want to be able to kind of feel connected to other people, even when they're not there. It's a really important skill to be able to develop. And then the other principle that's really critical is the idea that the relationship itself is the healing thing. So it's not that we. I have a background in social work, so I'm all for professional engagement with this and the importance of having professionals work with this too. But really, a lot of what people need is just good, positive relationship, love and care. This is something that even little kids can provide, not only to each other but to adults too. We can all do this for each other. So, and the relationship itself, just like what I said with the doctor and the study that they did with the doctor who just asked, what was life like for you, and how did you get through that? That was a relationship intervention. So we don't have to be all fancy. We don't have to have big clinical skills. We just need to learn to do our own work, because the person of the helper matters. Do our own work so that we can be that loving presence for other people. And this idea of vicarious trauma really is just about paying attention to how we get affected by other people's stories. How are we doing on time? Okay, so when we increase those self-capacities, the feeling worthy of life, the managing and modulating feelings and carrying a sense of positive connection with each other, when we increase those, crises go down, right? Individual, community, congregational. So there are many, many, many ways in which you can support these 3 self-capacities. And any of them work. There are 3 that I put here, but there's so many, and they don't even have to have a formal framework. Rich Relationships comes from a curriculum called Risking Connection and Faith Communities, and it stands for Respect, Information, Connection, and Hope. So you might think about, well, is there a way that we could make just ensure that our Sunday school classes are built around this idea of rich relationships? Or as a congregation, we're going to embrace this idea of rich relationships and incorporate it into everything we do. We're going to make sure that our council meetings are conducted under this idea of rich relationships, or whatever it might be. The 5 healing gestures I love, and I think I gave you a handout on that. There's a website, it's called changingmindsnow.org. If you go on there, there's videos, and there's, for each one of these healing gestures, they have the science behind why that's important, and ideas about how you can work at this with kids of different ages, so from toddlers all the way up through adolescence. It's a great resource. And again, these are things that even kindergartners can be taught how to do, to celebrate, to listen, to comfort, to collaborate, to inspire. You might think about, how do we in our congregation express these 5 healing gestures? How do we make this part of everything that we do? The fruit of the Spirit. If we want to get biblical, if we actually would live out the fruit of the Spirit and really pay attention to that, what we're doing there is we are attending to those 3 self-capacities for each other. So I just spent a lot of time there. This is the what the website looks like if you go to the changingmindsnow.org website. Fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, forbearance or patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The Bible sometimes knows what's going on. All right, so congregations as healing communities. As you think about going forward in this series, as you continue to think about how do we address these issues of addiction, of struggle that are going on, and just, I don't know if anybody gets the Sunday Trib or if anybody read it, but there was an article in there about DuPage County. Fentanyl deaths are up by 76% last year. And so, I mean, this is affecting all of our communities. And congregations, I think, are uniquely positioned to be these places of care and hope for people. This is another framework that helps congregations understand what it means to be what we call trauma-informed or healing-engaged, loving people. To realize how much we are affected by traumatic experiences in our lives, as well as how much we can be affected by the love and the care that we show for each other, to recognize signs of trauma and the ways in which we can be healing to each other, to respond, bringing what we know about what creates healing and resilience, resisting re-traumatization. So a lot of times when people have experienced trauma and they may respond in a way that seems inappropriate or out of control or too much for the situation, a lot of times we want to say, sit down, be quiet, don't do that, which can be re-traumatizing. So how do we create an environment where we can be gentle with people? One thing I will say is that in our conversations that we've had with many, many people around traumatic experience and faith communities, a lot of people have reported experiences of trauma from their faith community itself. We have a lot of experiences of abuse and of shaming and neglect and rejection that happen within faith contexts. And so we also have to be really careful, because in the faith context we have this overlay of God's love. And so when you get rejected by God, that can be really, really painful. And so how do we repair that? How do we acknowledge that and repair those kinds of relationships? And then how do we really work on resilience? So this is one congregation in Chicago. This is their closing song at the end of the service. They join hands and they sing a song together. And there are lots of ways in which they are living out love, healing, engaged love in this photo. Any initial things that you notice here? They're holding hands. So physical connection. Actually, the research shows that that's really an important thing. They're singing. So singing, rhythm, actually creating sound within your body, moving. The research shows this is a really helpful thing when we're experiencing stress. What else? Anything else that you see?
Different ages.
Different ages are together. There's a little girl in the back there. Yeah. This is their communion table. So they're engaged in ritual together. Ritual is a really important piece in building a sense of connection with each other. So that's one view. And then, so the other view, this is a different day, but so they've got kids involved. One of these people is had a, what's that?
Actually, some of them are maybe 3 years old.
Yeah,
Right.
little kids. So again, you know, what was one of the things that came from the HOPE study, the idea that a kid can contribute something? They're bringing kids in, and you know, I'm sure there are many ways to do this within your own congregation. Okay, let me stop there. There's a little bit more here, but what thoughts do you have, or what other examples might you have from your own congregations or your own experience about the way in which difficult experiences impact us, but even more so the way in which love and care and support can be protective for people? Ways that you think you do that in your own...
Well, I know for myself, when I started this church 10 years ago, the sense of community and a caring environment, it was exactly what I needed, and it's become, you know, that's why I call it my church family, because of that.
So what do people do that makes it feel welcoming and like a place you want to be?
They respond in ways of, you know, calling if, you know, if someone is sick or hasn't shown up at church for a while. Send cards. It's connection. You know that somebody cares. They'll take the time.
So tangible expressions of love and care, that somebody took the time to notice that you weren't there, or that you had something going on. Other ways that you do this already in your congregations? Yeah.
Acceptance,
Yeah.
just as you are.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that person's always crabby, they're always that way. Yeah, that's the way they are. Okay, it's okay. We're all different.
Yeah. So really making room, and really faith communities are places, a lot of times, where people who feel like they can't fit other places will find a home. Yeah. Great example. Other examples, other ways that you feel like your faith community already helps to support these three self-capacities. Feeling connected to people, even when you're not there, managing feelings, learning how to manage feelings, and feeling worthy of life, or like you deserve love, that you deserve to be part of the world. Other ways you feel like you do that in your congregations?
I think one of the times during the service that we do is really nice. We do the peace thing when you go on My wife's all over the church, so. Hugging, and we hug a lot and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And that's, it's good to see you and all, that's not just a whole handshake.
Right. Yeah.
That's very nice.
You don't like that. Some people don't.
I don't.
Yeah. And so, you know,
Like my own little spot.
Right.
Hi, how are you? That's good.
That's how you are.
We'll take you the way you are.
Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's really important too, you know, that we also learn to respect each other's boundaries, you know, and that sometimes, you know,
Touch doesn't mean. the
touch
same.
may not feel good to
Right.
everyone. And so, you know, to have it be okay to do an elbow bump, or to just shake hands, or knuckle bump, or just a, you know, peace sign, or eye contact, or whatever. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Are there some examples of faith communities that actually go out to institutions or areas or communities that need more of this support, that they might not be part of their congregation?
Yeah, I think a lot of congregations do that. But I think what I've experienced too is a lot of congregations do it out of a service framework. We are gonna come and we are gonna serve you, as opposed to, we really wanna be in a relationship with you, without an agenda. And I think that's something that we still have to learn, yeah. There's a Jewish congregation actually in Buffalo Grove, I think it is, way in the north suburbs, that is opening what they're calling a recovery home. So they have land, they're going to build a new synagogue, but attached to the synagogue will be this recovery home where they will be with, integrate people who are in recovery into their community. It's really an inspired vision of what they can be as a faith community. But I think that there are probably lots of ways that happens, also kind of informally or in the midst of, you know, like our church does pads. And so, you know, I know that a lot of the people that serve the dinner also go and sit with people and talk with them and just have conversation. You know, that's part of why they want to be there. And so my guess is that happens in a lot of those kinds of service settings.
In Elgin, there's a soup kitchen every night of the week so that, you know, people can go, all of the downtown. We're not in town, but we do, you know, the fifth Friday every month or something, Holy Trinity, but.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of different communities, not just the people that have it at their church, but other churches. Participate.
And that I've done before, and you come away with more knowledge from them, and more hope and serve and service, and they go away with something that they feel up in
Right.
a positive way.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's an example of how the relationship is the intervention. The relationship is the really important thing.
Just talking to you, who they are, and what's happening with them. Just very subtly, just bringing a conversation.
Yeah, well, I work one day a week at a program called More at 4. So this is for 4-year-olds that are identified as at risk. So as you talk about childhood trauma, these children probably have at least 1, 2, or 3 or more of those childhood traumas. And they are very different from the other work I've done with children. They are very needy and very acting out. And And I just think of each one of them, each one of those kids could have a one-on-one person all day long, talking to them, paying attention to them, playing with them. And I'm thinking, you know, what are the intersections in the world that we could have more adults with time, spending more time with those children to, you know, stop that cycle.
Right, yeah.
That there's not enough teachers, there's not enough therapists, there's not enough assistants.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if there was a way, you know, that faith communities would take over somewhat.
Yeah. The research shows that the evidence-based, what do I want to say, response or whatever, the thing that makes the difference for kids is a meaningful relationship, a positive relationship with a caring adult. It could be someone in the family, but also someone outside of the family. That is the thing that makes a difference for kids, for their long-term ability to cope and to be well, and to be resilient, to be healthy. So this thing of bringing adults alongside kids, and you know, but the other thing too is that it's really challenging to be with kids that are, you know, and so you have to you have to pay attention to what's going on in myself, you know, and how do I really center myself so that I can bear the fruits of the Spirit for this child, or I can have a rich relationship with this child, or I can have these healing gestures with children. So I see Pat is standing up, so I think we're at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
So,
So if there's any final questions, maybe.
so I hope this sort of lays some groundwork for what's to come. This wasn't really focused specifically on addictions, but hopefully gives you an idea of ways in which you have the equipment already. You have the capacity already to be a source of healing and hope as you are healing, engaged, and loving people in your congregations and across your community.
Thank you so much. A reminder that on February 7th, we will be starting our Safe Landings support group from 6:30 to 7:30 here at the church. And there is no requirements, no specific diagnosis. It's a place to come and know and be reminded that you're a worthwhile person and we're all doing the best that we can and maybe have a little more hope for the coming week. The other thing is February 24th, 4 o'clock, Stephen Kavalovich, paramedic from New Jersey, a national speaker on his recovery story, will be with us. And like I think I mentioned before, I've heard him speak and I think he's excellent, so I'm looking forward to that. Finally, we have these signs over here. If any of you, our goal as a congregation is to salt and pepper cover Elgin with these signs. You are welcome to take one and for yourself, and if you have a neighbor that you think might put one in their yard. They're yard signs. They're in Spanish on one side and they are in English on the other side. And so we don't charge for these. We just ask that you take them and put them in your yard. So thank you so much for coming, especially on such an awful night.